The Little Bell of Vienna? The bell had been silent for 50 years of sorrow, until it rang with a sound that could heal a city. The city of Vienna, on Christmas Eve, was a grand imperial dream. The magnificent palaces and opera houses of the Ringstrasse were draped in elegant, glittering lights, and the air, cold and crisp, was alive with the sound of waltzes drifting from the open doors of coffee houses and the cheerful, clopping rhythm of the horse-drawn fiacre carriages on the cobblestones. In the grand squares, the Christkindl markts were nearing their final festive hours, the warm, fragrant steam of glühwein and roasting almonds rising to mingle with the first, hesitant, and impossibly gentle snowflakes that had begun to fall. But away from the grand, bustling heart of the city, in a small, quiet, and ancient parish in the Josefstadt district, a different kind of silence reigned. Here, the streets were narrower, the buildings more humble, and the festive cheer was a quieter, more muted, and more personal affair. At the heart of this district stood the old church of St. Florian, a simple, beautiful, and slightly weary-looking building that had stood as a silent witness to the city's triumphs and its tragedies for 500 years. Its bell tower held a single, small, but legendarily beautiful bell. It was known as das kleine Herz, the little heart. The old one said its voice was not the deep, booming, and authoritative tone of the great cathedral bells, but a high, clear, and impossibly pure silver tone, a sound so beautiful it was said to be the voice of hope itself. But the little heart had not spoken in 50 years. It hung in its belfry, a silent, bronze and lonely sentinel, its heart frozen, its voice a forgotten, beautiful memory. Characters wish or struggle. The heart's winter. In a small, cluttered apartment that overlooked the silent church lived an old man named Anton. He was the church's caretaker, a position he had held for all of his adult life. He was a man as quiet, as humble, and as weary as the old church he tended. His hands were gnarled, his shoulders were stooped, and his eyes, a pale watery blue, held the deep, quiet, and unhealed sorrow of a man who had seen too much. The silence of the bell was Anton's own personal and lifelong struggle. 50 years ago, in the final, terrible, and chaotic days of a great and terrible war, a stray shell had struck the bell tower. The tower had survived, but the intricate, delicate, and ancient clockwork mechanism that gave the bell its voice had been shattered. And in that same terrible and final raid, Anton, then just a young boy, had lost his older brother, a brave, kind, and brilliant young man who had been the bright, hopeful, and shining star of his small and now broken family. The two events, the silencing of the bell and the silencing of his own personal joy, had become inextricably and painfully intertwined in his mind. The silent, broken bell was a constant public monument to his own private and unhealed grief. For 50 years he had tended the church. He had swept its floors. He had polished its pews. But he could not bring himself to even climb the winding stone stairs to the belfry. The silence from above was a wound in the heart of his parish, and a wound in the heart of his own lonely and quiet life. His wish, a deep, hopeless, and 50-year-old prayer, was to hear that beautiful silver note of hope just one more time. The magical encounter, a spark of wonder. On this Christmas Eve, as the city prepared to celebrate a new and hopeful era, Anton sat in his small, dark apartment, the silence from the bell tower a heavy, suffocating blanket. He could hear the distant joyful bells from the great St. Stephen's Cathedral in the center of the city, and each beautiful, resonant chime was a painful, mocking reminder of the beautiful, silent voice of his own small church. He was a man who had long ago given up on miracles, but as he sat there, a strange and insistent sound began to cut through his quiet, sorrowful reverie. It was a soft, rhythmic, and metallic tink-tink-tink, a sound that seemed to be coming from the church itself. It was the sound of a small and very determined hammer against cold, hard metal. He thought he was imagining it, a ghost of a sound from a happier and more industrious time. But the sound was persistent. With a weary, curious sigh, he put on his heavy woolen coat and crossed the small snowy square to the church. He unlocked the great, heavy oaken door and stepped into the cold, silent, and cavernous space. The only light the faint flickering glow of 100 votive candles. The sound was louder in here, and it was coming from above. It was coming from the bell tower. His heart, a slow and steady old man's heart, began to beat a little faster. He had not set foot on the belfry stairs in 50 years. But the sound, a sound of work, of purpose, of hope, pulled him forward. With a sense of trepidation that was a cold, hard knot in his stomach, he began to climb the winding, stone, and ghost-filled stairs. When he reached the top, he pushed open the heavy wooden door to the belfry. The room was dark and cold and filled with the ghosts of 1,000 silent midnights. But it was not empty. In the center of the room, standing beside the great, silent, and broken clockwork mechanism, was a figure. It was a young man, a boy, really, no older than his brother had been. He was a traveling apprentice, a journeyman, his face smudged with grease, his eyes bright with a focused, intelligent, and deeply peaceful energy. And in his hand he held a small and very determined hammer. He was not destroying, he was mending. "Forgive the intrusion, old father," the young man said, his voice soft and full of a quiet and deeply profound respect. "But a silence this sad, on a night this holy, is a crime against hope. I thought I might try to mend it, the transformation, the gift within." Anton stood, speechless. For 50 years, the greatest engineers in Vienna had looked at this broken, shattered mechanism and had declared it a lost cause. And now a single, unknown, and itinerant boy with nothing but a small bag of tools and a quiet, determined spirit was attempting the impossible. "It cannot be done," Anton whispered, the words the familiar, heavy, and hopeless refrain of his entire adult life. The young man looked up from his work, and he smiled a smile that was so full of a pure, uncomplicated, and powerful hope that it was like a beam of sunlight in the dark, dusty, and sorrowful room. "Everything that is broken," he said softly, "can be mended. It just requires a patient hand and a hopeful heart." And in that moment, Anton saw it. In the young man's eyes, in his gentle, confident smile, in the quiet, determined set of his jaw, he saw his brother. It was not a physical resemblance. It was an echo of a spirit, a reincarnation of a beautiful, hopeful, and long-lost light. A 50-year-old wall of grief, of fear, of a stubborn and self-imposed paralysis began to crumble in Anton's own weary heart. He stepped forward. "Show me," he said, his voice a hoarse and rusty croak. "Show me what is needed." And for the next several hours, in the cold, dark, and forgotten belfry, a quiet, beautiful, and deeply sacred miracle of work unfolded. The old man, the keeper of the wound, and the young man, the vessel of a new hope, worked together. Anton's old and trembling hands became steady. His mind, which he had thought was dull and weary, became sharp. His 50 years of intimate and sorrowful knowledge of this broken thing now a vital and necessary tool. The young man, with his fresh eyes, his brilliant, intuitive understanding of the mechanics, and his unwavering, hopeful spirit, was the catalyst, the spark. They did not just mend the broken gears, they mended the broken heart of the tower, and in the process, they mended the broken, silent, and 50-year-old heart of the old man himself. The ending, the whisper of Christmas, with a single minute to spare before the midnight hour, their work was done. They stood back, their breath held, their faces illuminated by the single flickering lantern, a mixture of exhaustion, of hope, of a profound and shared purpose. The young man gave a single, final, and gentle push to the great central pendulum. There was a low, groaning sound of ancient, protesting metal, a series of satisfying, heavy, and resonant clicks, and then the great, silent, and 500-year-old heart of the tower began to beat again. And as the great midnight hour arrived, the hammer was lifted, and it struck the bell. The sound that erupted from the tower was not a sound of this earth. It was a single, perfect, and impossibly pure note of pure liquid silver. It was a sound of hope, of rebirth, of a joy so profound it was heartbreakingly beautiful. It soared out over the quiet, snowy, and listening parish. A voice returned from the dead. It was a sound that did not just break the silence, it healed it. Down in the streets, the people of the parish stopped. They came out of their warm, lighted homes, their faces turned upward, their eyes filled with tears of a joyful and deeply personal disbelief. Their bell, their little heart, it was singing again. The sound washed over the city, a wave of pure, beautiful, and healing hope, a promise that even the oldest and deepest of sorrows could be mended, that even the longest and most silent of winters must eventually give way to the spring. Anton stood in the belfry, his hand on the young man's shoulder, his own silent tears tracing a new and hopeful path down his old, wrinkled cheeks. The sound of the bell was not just the voice of the church. It was the voice of his own, healed and finally peaceful heart. The narrator reflects that a great sorrow can silence us, can break the beautiful, intricate, and hopeful mechanism of our own hearts, and we can live in that silence for a lifetime, believing it to be a permanent and unchangeable condition. But hope is a persistent and a patient craftsman, and sometimes on the most magical of nights it will arrive unannounced in the form of a quiet and gentle stranger, a stranger who reminds us that nothing is ever truly and permanently broken. It is simply and quietly waiting for a hopeful heart and a willing hand to come along and mend it. And that's how Christmas found its way into another heart